The days following Azaleth's quiet declaration of who he was seemed to stretch on endlessly. The court, his father, and the kingdom waited. There was no immediate reaction from King Ignar or the royal advisors. It was as if they were all holding their breath, waiting to see if Azaleth would truly live up to the expectations of his role as prince, for the first time in a long time. Azaleth felt like he was living in the eye of a storm. He had chosen to walk a path that was different from what everyone else had expected of him. His flame, gentle and steady, was something new, but it was his flame, and he was determined to let it grow. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this peace, this quiet strength, was only temporary. It would be tested soon enough. One evening, after a long day of meetings with his father and the advisors, Azaleth found himself standing by the palace window, looking out over the vast landscape. The sun had just set, and the sky was painted in shades of orange and purple. It was a peaceful sight, one that made Azaleth feel small in the grand scheme of things. The vastness of the world outside reminded him how much was still unknown, how much was still to be discovered. The sound of footsteps behind him broke his thoughts. Tessa had come to visit him, as she often did. Over the past weeks, their conversations had become more frequent. Azaleth had found a kind of solace in her presence. She was always calm, always sure of herself, even when the world around them seemed to be falling apart. Tessa had taught him more than just the whistling tune. She had shown him that it was okay to be uncertain, to take time to find his place in the world. "Azaleth," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "You've been quiet lately. What's on your mind?" He turned to face her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I've been thinking about my father, about the kingdom, about the fire inside me." Tessa raised an eyebrow, her gaze steady. "You've been thinking about a lot of things." Azaleth nodded. "I'm trying to figure out where I fit in all of this. I'm not the dragon they want me to be, but I'm starting to realize I don't think I can be anyone else." Tessa walked closer to him, her eyes full of understanding. "You can't be anyone else, Azaleth. That's the truth. The question is whether you're ready to embrace that. Because when you do, there will be no turning back. You'll be choosing your own path, and that might not be easy." Azaleth's heart pounded in his chest. He had made that choice, hadn't he? He had chosen to live with the fire he had rediscovered, not the one they had wanted for him. But would it be enough? Would they accept him as he was? Or would the kingdom demand more? Before Azaleth could speak, there was a loud knock on the door. A servant entered, bowing quickly before speaking. "Your Majesty," he said, addressing Azaleth with the formal title, "the king requests your presence immediately." Azaleth's stomach tightened. He had been expecting this. He had known the moment would come when his father would demand answers. The peace he had found, the flame he had reignited it, was about to be tested. "I'll go," Azaleth said, his voice calm but his heart racing. He turned to Tessa, who was watching him with a concerned expression. "Stay here," he said. "I'll return shortly." Tessa nodded, but there was a shadow in her eyes. "Be careful, Azaleth," she warned. "The court may not be as accepting as you hope." Azaleth gave her a small smile before leaving the room. He walked through the grand halls of the palace, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Every corner of the palace felt heavy with history, with the weight of expectations placed on his shoulders since the day he was born. As he entered his father's chambers, he saw King Ignar seated at his throne, flanked by the royal advisors. Their faces were serious, their expressions hard to read. Azaleth stood tall before them, though his heart thudded in his chest. "Azaleth," King Ignar began, his voice cold and commanding, "it has come to my attention that you are no longer the prince I raised you to be." Azaleth swallowed hard but did not flinch. "I am still your son, father." The king's eyes narrowed. "You are still my son, yes. But you are not the son I need. You have failed to live up to the expectations of this kingdom. You have chosen to let your flame flicker, instead of burning with the power of our ancestors. What use is a prince who cannot rule with strength? What use is a dragon who refuses to fly?" Azaleth felt a pang in his chest at the harsh words, but he stood firm. "I am still a dragon, father, but I will not be the dragon you want me to be. My flame is not like the one you remember. It's not about burning everything in my path. It's about something else, something deeper. King Egnar slammed his fist on the arm of the throne, his anger flaring. You speak of your flame like it is some kind of gentle thing, something to be cherished and admired. But it is not. Your flame is power, Azaleth. It is strength. If you do not learn to control it, to use it, as we were taught, then you will never be fit to rule. Azaleth's heart twisted. The weight of his father's words felt like a boulder crushing him from all sides. He had never been good enough for King Ignar as a child. He had been praised for his strength, for his fire, for the way he had flown with such grace and power. But now that he was different, now that he had learned to find his own flame, his father saw it as a weakness. "Father," Azaleth said, his voice steady, but his heart heavy, "I cannot be what you want me to be. I cannot be a symbol of power and destruction. That is not who I am." King Ignar stood up, his eyes cold with fury. "Then you are no son of mine." Azaleth's chest tightened. He had known that this moment would come, but hearing his father say those words felt like a dagger to his heart. He had hoped for acceptance, for understanding, but instead he was met with rejection. The room fell silent. Azaleth's heart pounded in his ears. He knew what was at stake. If he did not fight back now, if he did not prove himself worthy of his father's approval, then everything he had worked for, everything he had become, would be lost. But as he stood there, facing his father's wrath, Azaleth realized something. He had already proven himself. He had found his fire, and he had chosen his path. It was not the path of destruction that his father wanted. It was the path of understanding, of patience, of balance. He could not walk away from it now. "I may not be the son you wanted," Azaleth said, his voice clear and strong, "but I am the son I was meant to be. I have found my fire, and I will not let it be extinguished." With that, Azaleth turned and walked out of the chamber, his head held high. He had chosen his path, and no matter what happened next, he would walk it with his head held high. Hook, as Azaleth left the palace chambers, his mind raced with what had just transpired. His father had rejected him, but Azaleth knew the hardest part was yet to come. Would the kingdom accept the new prince, the one who had found his own fire? Or would he be cast aside as a failure, destined to live in the shadows of the past? In this part, Azaleth faces the ultimate test of his growth and self-acceptance. His father's rejection forces him to confront his identity and his future as a leader. The emotional tension between father and son is high, with Azaleth realizing that the path to redemption is filled with sacrifice and personal strength. The sun rose over the kingdom of Drakthar, casting its golden light across the vast lands, but inside the royal palace, there was only silence. Azaleth had not returned to his chambers after the confrontation with his father. Instead, he had walked out into the cool, crisp morning air, his mind filled with a storm of thoughts and emotions. He was no longer the prince his father wanted, and yet he knew he couldn't walk away from the truth he had found within himself. Azaleth stood by the palace walls, looking out at the horizon. The flame inside him burned brighter now, not with fury or destruction, but with a quiet, steady warmth. His father's words still echoed in his mind, "You are no son of mine." But Azaleth had come to understand something important that day. His flame, though different, was still his own, and it was a fire that could not be extinguished by anyone, not even by the king. Tessa had been right. He had to choose his own path, and now that path was clearer than ever before. But that didn't mean it would be easy. The kingdom still expected him to fulfill the role of a powerful prince, the son of a king. And the fire he had found, though true and strong, was not the kind of fire they had imagined. The soft sound of footsteps behind him broke Azaleth's thoughts. He turned to see Tessa approaching, her face calm but full of concern. She had been there for him throughout this journey, always patient, always understanding. "You left so quickly," she said softly, her eyes searching his face. "How were you holding up?" Azaleth didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared out at the horizon, his mind still processing everything that had happened. The weight of his father's rejection still hung heavy in his chest, but he knew he couldn't let it control him any longer. "I've learned something," Tessa Azaleth finally said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I've learned that I can't live up to the expectations of others if it means losing who I am." Tessa's expression softened. "That's a hard lesson, Azaleth, but it's one that will make you stronger. You've already shown your strength. You've found your fire." Azaleth turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "But will they ever accept me? Will the kingdom see the prince they need, or will they see only the son who failed to live up to their ideals?" Tessa smiled gently, her eyes full of kindness. "Azaleth, the kingdom doesn't need the prince you think they want. They need a leader who is true to himself. They need someone who will guide them with a steady heart, not someone who will burn everything down in their wake. You've already proven that you can be that leader." Azaleth felt the weight on his shoulders lighten, but only slightly. "But I'm still not sure how to make them understand. How do I show them the truth of who I am without losing everything?" Tessa stepped closer to him, her voice soft but certain. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Azaleth. The truth of who you are is already inside you. All you need to do is stand tall and let your flame shine. The rest will follow." Azaleth looked at Tessa, his heart swelling with gratitude. She had always been there for him, even when he couldn't see the path ahead. She had helped him find his flame, and now she was helping him believe in it. "Thank you, Azaleth," said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. "You've shown me so much more than I could have ever hoped for." Tessa smiled and placed a hand on his arm. "It was always inside you, Azaleth. I just helped you find it." For a long moment, the two of them stood there in silence, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. The warmth of the morning sun felt like a symbol of the new beginning Azaleth had found. The road ahead would not be easy, but it was his road to walk, and he was no longer afraid. Later that day, Azaleth stood before the kingdom's court once more. The grand hall was filled with nobles and advisors, all eyes fixed on him as he stepped forward. His father sat at the head of the room, his expression unreadable. The advisors and courtiers watched with a mixture of expectation and uncertainty. The kingdom was waiting for the prince to make his choice. Azaleth stood tall, his heart steady. His father's harsh words still echoed in his mind, but they no longer had the power to shake him. He had come to understand that he was not defined by anyone else's expectations, not by his father, not by the kingdom, and not by the image of the perfect prince they had created in their minds. "I have come to speak the truth," Azaleth said, his voice calm but full of strength. "The fire I carry within me is not the same fire that I once had. It is not the fire of destruction, the fire of power and control. It is the fire of patience, of understanding, and of balance. It is a fire that burns steadily, not in flashes of rage, but in a quiet strength that can guide and protect." His words echoed through the hall, and for a moment there was silence. His father's gaze was cold, but Azaleth did not flinch. This was who he was, and he would not apologize for it. "The kingdom does not need a prince who will burn everything in his path," Azaleth continued. "The kingdom needs a leader who can guide them with wisdom, with strength of heart, and with the fire that burns within him, no matter how small it may seem to others. I will not be the prince you expected, but I will be the prince you need." There was a long pause before the first advisor spoke, his voice low but respectful. "Your Majesty, if you truly believe this is the path you must take, then we will follow you." Azaleth looked at the advisor, then at the others in the room. One by one, the nobles and advisors nodded in agreement. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't without doubt, but Azaleth could see the shift. They weren't expecting a fire of destruction anymore. They were starting to understand that the fire he carried was one that could light the way forward. As the court slowly began to accept his words, Azaleth felt a quiet sense of relief. He was not perfect. He was not the prince they had imagined. But he was the prince who had found his truth, and that truth was enough. Later that night, as the moon rose over the kingdom, Azaleth stood outside the palace, looking up at the stars. The fire inside him burned brighter now, steady and unwavering. The kingdom was still uncertain, but he no longer feared that. He had his path, and he would walk it, no matter where it led. Tessa stood beside him, her presence a silent comfort. "You did it," she said softly, her voice filled with pride. Azaleth smiled, awaited the day finally lifting from his shoulders. "We did it, Tessa. I couldn't have done it without you." Tessa smiled back, her eyes sparkling. No, Azaleth. You've always had the strength. I just helped you find it. The two of them stood there, side by side, as the stars above them shone brightly in the night sky. Azaleth knew that the future was still uncertain, but he was ready to face it. He had found his fire, and with it, he had found his place in the world hook. As the kingdom of Drakthor began to turn its gaze toward the future, Azaleth knew that his journey had only just begun. The road ahead would be filled with challenges and obstacles, but he was no longer afraid. His fire would guide him, and with it, he would lead his kingdom into a new dawn. As the days passed, Azaleth felt the flickering flame inside him grow stronger. The rhythm, the quiet hum that Tessa had shared with him, had awakened something that he thought he had lost forever. It wasn't like the old fire he used to have, the blazing, uncontrollable inferno that could scorch entire villages. But it was something different, something more controlled. And that, he realized, might be even more powerful than what he had once known. Still, doubts lingered in his mind. The court, his family, they would never accept this softer fire. They wanted the old Azaleth, the dragon prince who could command the skies with a single breath. A dragon who was a symbol of strength and power, but he was no longer that dragon. He had changed. It was a cold evening when the prince's doubts came to a head. He was walking through the grand corridors of the palace, the stone walls echoing with the sound of his footsteps. The palace, with its high ceilings and darkened hallways, had always been a place of safety and comfort for him. But tonight it felt different. The weight of his father's disappointment hung heavy in the air, and he couldn't escape the feeling that he didn't belong here anymore. He had tried to speak to his father, King Ignor, about the changes inside him. But every time he did, the king's eyes turned cold, his face hard with the unspoken expectation that Azaleth should be more like the dragon he once was, more like the prince the kingdom deserved. Azaleth paused in front of his father's chambers, staring at the closed door. He could hear the muffled voices inside, his father and the royal advisors discussing matters of the kingdom. He had overheard their conversations more times than he could count, their words filled with worry about his future, about his weakness. The door opened suddenly, and Azaleth was caught off guard as one of the advisors stepped out, his face tight with disapproval. The man's eyes flicked to Azaleth briefly before turning away. "The prince still has not learned his place," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for Azaleth to hear. Azaleth flinched at the words, his heart sinking. It was true. He hadn't found his place, not in the court and not in his own heart. The fire inside him was still growing, still shifting, but it wasn't the fire they wanted. It wasn't the fire of a king's son. He turned away quickly, retreating to his chambers before anyone else could see the hurt on his face. The flames inside him burned, but they weren't the flames of a warrior. They were quiet, patient, like a hearth fire warming the soul instead of a raging storm. Once inside his room, Azaleth slumped onto his bed, burying his face in his hands. He wanted to scream, to let the anger and frustration burn through him, but the flame inside him didn't want that. It wasn't about rage. It was about something deeper, something more meaningful. And that, perhaps, was the most difficult thing of all to accept. There was a soft knock at his door. Azaleth. Came the voice he knew so well. Tessa. He stood quickly, wiping the tears from his eyes. He hadn't wanted her to see him like this. But when he opened the door, there she stood, her face calm and understanding. She didn't say anything at first, just stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "You've been avoiding me," she said gently, her voice never accusing but full of concern. "I'm not avoiding you," Azaleth said quickly, though the lie felt hollow. I don't know what I'm doing anymore, Tessa." She walked toward him, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "You're not the first to feel lost, Azaleth," she said softly. "Even the greatest of dragons go through moments of doubt. But it doesn't mean you've lost your way. It just means you're on the path to finding it." Azaleth looked at her, his heart heavy. "I'm not like them," he whispered. "Not like my father, not like the dragons in the court. I don't have the fire they want me to have. I don't have the strength they expect from me." Tessa smiled, her eyes warm with a knowing that Azaleth had never expected from a human. But you have your own fire, Azaleth. It's not about being like anyone else. It's about finding what makes you. You. He shook his head, the doubt still clinging to him. I don't even know who I am anymore. Tessa reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle but firm. You are more than just the fire you breathe, Azaleth. You're the heart behind it. That's what makes you a dragon. You've been looking for your fire outside of yourself, but it's always been inside. You just have to trust it. Her words, simple as they were, felt like a weight being lifted from his chest. The fire inside him was his, not for anyone else to define. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about fulfilling expectations. It was about learning to accept himself for who he truly was, no matter how different that might be. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, feeling the warmth of his flame stir again. This time it was different. It wasn't a rush of heat, a surge of power that could burn everything in its path. It was a soft glow, a steady warmth that spread through him like the first light of dawn. His fire had always been there, waiting patiently for him to understand it. Thank you, Azaleth whispered, looking at Tessa with gratitude. I think I understand now. Tessa smiled, her eyes sparkling. You'll find your way, Azaleth. I have no doubt about that. But even as Azaleth felt a flicker of hope rise within him, he knew that there were still challenges ahead. The court, his family, they would not accept this new fire so easily. His father would demand more, would expect the fierce, powerful dragon that Azaleth had been. And the people of the kingdom would want their prince to be the symbol of strength that they had always known. But Azaleth no longer feared that. He knew now that his fire was enough. It wasn't about burning with the intensity of the sun. It was about burning with the quiet strength of the stars. The next morning, Azaleth went to the royal court. He had made his decision. It was time to show them who he really was. The king and the advisors were waiting for him, their eyes cold and expectant. They wanted to see the prince, the dragon, the warrior. Azaleth stood tall before them, his heart steady. He had come to accept that his flame, though quiet, was strong. He might not be the dragon they expected, but he was the dragon he had always meant to be. When he spoke, his voice was firm, unwavering. I am your prince. I am Azaleth, and this is the fire I have to offer. He didn't need to show them his power in the way they expected. The fire that had once been a symbol of force and strength is now a symbol of something deeper, his true self. The room fell silent. Azaleth could feel their eyes on him, judging him, but he didn't flinch. He had nothing to prove to them anymore. His flame was enough hook. As the days went by, the kingdom waited for Azaleth to prove himself, his father, the court, and everyone else. But as the prince stood before them, he knew that the hardest battle was yet to come. Would they accept the fire he had found within himself, or would they demand that he become something he was not? This part deepens Azaleth's internal conflict and growth. As he learns to accept his own flame and prepare for the challenges ahead, there's a shift in his character, moving from doubt to self-acceptance. But the future remains uncertain. The emotional tension remains high, with the prince facing the expectations of his royal family and the kingdom. In the grand kingdom of Drakthar, dragons ruled with ancient wisdom, their fiery breath capable of scorching entire cities. The skies were their domain, and their wings spread like the winds of legends. Among them was Prince Azaleth, the youngest son of King Ignar and Queen Velastra. He was a dragon like no other, with scales that gleamed like polished obsidian and eyes that could burn through the darkness. Yet there was something missing, a flame. His fire, once strong and fierce, had gone out. For years, Azaleth's fire had been the pride of the kingdom. His ability to breathe fire was a symbol of his power, a testament to his royal bloodline. But now, no matter how hard he tried, no flame would spark from his mouth. The once mighty dragon, whose roar could make mountains tremble, now felt empty inside. He could no longer light the darkened skies, and his heart grew cold with every passing day. In the royal palace, whispers started to spread. The prince has lost his flame. He is no longer the son we once knew. His father, King Ignar, who had once held his son in high regard, began to distance himself. The king, known for his fierce temper, no longer looked at Azaleth with pride. Queen Velastra, always regal and composed, would only give her son distant glances, as if mourning the loss of something precious. Azaleth spent his days alone in his chambers, avoiding the palace court and the demands of the royal family. The weight of their expectations pressed heavily on his wings, and he found it impossible to escape their gazes. The prince, who had once flown through the clouds with joy, now could hardly bring himself to leave the ground. His wings, once a symbol of freedom, now felt like burdens. But one afternoon, as Azaleth wandered the lower halls of the palace in search of peace, he came across something unexpected. A Humyn servant was sweeping the long corridor. Her name was Tessa, and she was a janitor who worked in the palace. She wore a simple uniform, nothing like the elaborate gowns of the court, but there was a strange calmness about her. She hummed softly as she worked, her voice blending with the quiet sounds of the palace. Azaleth, curious about the woman who seemed so unaffected by the palace's chaos, stopped to watch her for a moment. He had seen many Humyns in the palace before, but none of them had ever caught his attention like this one. There was something peaceful in the way she moved, as though the weight of the world did not touch her. As he approached, Tessa looked up, meeting his gaze with a kind, but slightly puzzled expression. "Can I help you, my lord?" she asked, her voice soft and respectful. Azaleth hesitated. He had always been the prince, the one who was expected to command, to rule. But now, in this moment, he felt like a shadow of what he once was. His fire had faded, and with it, so had his confidence. "I was just walking," Azaleth said, his voice quiet. "I don't mean to disturb you," Tessa smiled, the corners of her lips lifting gently. "It's no trouble, my lord. The halls are always quieter when they're clean." Azaleth looked at her, his curiosity growing. "You seem ... content. How is it that you are always so calm, so unaffected?" Tessa shrugged, her broom sweeping along the floor. "I suppose I've learned to find peace in the little things. There's beauty in simplicity, my lord. Even in the midst of all this." Azaleth blinked. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. He was the prince, the dragon, the one who had always been in control. Yet here was this Humyn, a mere janitor, who seemed to find peace in the very things that overwhelmed him. It made him wonder if he had been looking for something in all the wrong places. "I used to be able to breathe fire," Azaleth said quietly, almost to himself. "But now, it's as if the flame has disappeared." Tessa paused, her broom still in her hands. She studied him for a moment, as though seeing something that others had missed. "Maybe you're not meant to find your fire in the way you once did," she said softly. Azaleth raised an eyebrow, confused. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes," she began, "the things we lose are not lost forever. We just have to find a different way to bring them back." Azaleth stared at her for a long time, unsure of what she meant. A Humyn, someone who had never experienced the burning fire of a dragon telling him that he could find his flame again? It seemed impossible. Yet there was something in her words that stirred something deep within him. A small flicker, like the embers of a fire waiting to be reignited. "Would you teach me?" Azaleth asked, surprising even himself. The words had slipped out before he could stop them. "Teach me how to find my fire again." Tessa smiled, the warmth of her expression as natural as the sun's rays. "I can't promise you anything, my lord, but I can show you something. A little secret I've learned." Azaleth watched her with curiosity. What kind of secret could a janitor possibly know about a dragon's fire? "Come with me," she said, walking toward a small, quiet corner of the palace, a place where the sounds of the court didn't reach. Azaleth followed her, his steps slow, sure of what was happening, but unwilling to let go of this strange sense of hope. Tessa stood before him, looking at him with gentle eyes. "Now, close your eyes," she instructed. "Take a deep breath and listen." Azaleth did as she said, his breath steady as he focused on her voice. It was soft at first, but then she began to hum, a gentle, rhythmic tune that seemed to vibrate in the air. It was not a song of power, but of calm, of peace. A simple melody that wrapped around him like a warm blanket on a cold night. "Listen to the rhythm," Tessa said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Feel it in your heart." Azaleth felt the pulse of the rhythm, the gentle flow of the song. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. It wasn't fire or destruction. It wasn't about power. It was about harmony, about finding balance within himself. As he listened, something within him began to stir. A faint warmth spread from his chest, a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. It was small, fragile, but it was there. The rhythm of the tune seemed to guide it, to coax it back to life. Tessa smiled as she watched him. "You see," she whispered, "it's not about forcing the fire. Sometimes you just have to find the rhythm inside yourself." Ozaleth opened his eyes, staring at her in awe. He didn't fully understand what had happened, but he could feel it. The flame had not returned in the way he had expected, but it was there, quietly flickering in his heart. "Thank you," Ozaleth said, his voice thick with emotion. Tessa nodded, her smile kind but knowing. "It's not just me, my lord. It's you. You have to find your fire, and you have to let it grow in your own time." Ozaleth stood still for a moment, feeling the strange warmth inside him. Maybe, just maybe, he had found something that would help him reclaim his fire. Hook, as Ozaleth left the small corner of the palace, he felt a change stirring deep within him. The ember of his lost flame had been reignited, but the true test was yet to come. Would he be able to bring it back to life before it was too late? After the brief encounter in the quiet corner of the palace, Ozaleth couldn't stop thinking about Tessa, the way she had spoken, the way she had led him into that strange rhythm. It had sparked something inside him, a tiny flame that had been lost for so long. He still couldn't explain it, but for the first time in years, Ozaleth felt like he had some hope left. He wasn't sure how this simple human had known exactly what he needed, but she had awakened something inside him. Over the next few days, Ozaleth found himself seeking her out. It wasn't easy. He had grown accustomed to avoiding everyone: his father's disappointed gaze, his mother's distant silence. But now, he wanted to see Tessa again. He wanted to hear that gentle tune, that strange, simple song that seemed to stir his heart. It was late in the afternoon when Ozaleth found her again. She was sweeping the same hallway, just as she had been the first time he had seen her. There was something peaceful about her, something calming that made Ozaleth feel less like a prince and more like a person. He approached her quietly, unsure of how to start the conversation. "Hello, Tessa," he said softly. She looked up, a bit surprised to see him again, but quickly recovered with a warm smile. "My lord, you've returned." Ozaleth hesitated for a moment. I was hoping we could talk again." "About the song?" "The tune you were humming. It helped me." Tessa tilted her head slightly, as if trying to understand the prince's request. "You mean the whistling?" "Yes," Ozaleth said quickly, "the whistling. It's strange, but I can't explain it. When I listened to it, something inside me changed. I felt something. A warmth. Something I haven't felt in a long time." Tessa's smile grew, and she nodded. "It's not magic, my lord. Not in the way you might think. It's just a simple rhythm, something I've learned over the years. It's something anyone can do if they're willing to listen." Ozaleth frowned slightly. "Anyone?" "Anyone who's open to it," she replied, her voice calm and soothing. "Music or rhythm, it's not always about power. Sometimes it's about finding the right balance within yourself. If you can find that balance, you might just find what you've lost." Ozaleth thought about her words for a moment. Could it really be that simple? Could something as small as a rhythm restore his flame, the fire that had once been his pride and now felt like a distant memory? "I want to learn," he said finally, his voice firm. "Teach me how to listen. Teach me how to find that balance." Tessa smiled and set her broom aside. "I can show you, but you have to be patient. It's not something that happens overnight. You'll need to practice." Ozaleth nodded. He had nothing left to lose. For so long, he had tried everything to reclaim his fire. He had tried to force it, to summon it with brute strength, but it had never worked. Perhaps this simple rhythm was the key to something deeper, something he had missed all along. The two of them sat together in the quiet hallway, far from the eyes of the court. Tessa began to hum softly, the same tune she had sung before, her voice light and calming. Azaleth closed his eyes, trying to focus on the melody. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a soft, distant sound, but as he listened, he felt the rhythm pulse through him. It wasn't a loud, overwhelming sound. It was gentle, like the wind brushing against his wings, like the soft flow of water through a stream. "Feel it," Tessa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let the rhythm move through you. Breathe in time with the music. Let it guide you." Azaleth took a deep breath, doing as she instructed. At first, nothing happened. His heart raced as he tried to focus. It felt like a waste of time. How could something so simple help him find his fire? But then, just as his frustration began to grow, he felt something shift inside him. It was subtle at first, just a small flicker deep within his chest. His heartbeat seemed to match the rhythm of Tessa's humming, and for a brief moment, he felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years. "Good," Tessa said, her voice still soft. "Keep going. Breathe with the rhythm." Azaleth inhaled deeply again, his mind focused entirely on the melody. He could feel it, now the rhythm, the pulse. It wasn't forceful. It wasn't about pushing his power to its limits. It was about connecting with something deep inside of him, something that had been buried under his frustration, under his fear of failure. As he breathed, he began to feel the familiar warmth return, not in the way he had expected, but in a gentler, quieter way. It wasn't the roaring fire of his youth, but it was a fire nonetheless, a soft, steady flame that was beginning to grow. He exhaled slowly, feeling the rhythm guide the flow of air through him. Tessa watched him closely, her eyes bright with understanding. "There it is," she said quietly, "your flame. It's not about making it burn hot and fast. It's about letting it grow slowly, steadily. You have to listen to it, let it guide you." Azaleth opened his eyes, staring at her in awe. He could feel the fire inside him, still small, but it was there. It wasn't as fierce as before, but it was warm, comforting. For the first time in a long time, he felt like himself again. "I can feel it," he whispered. "The fire. It's there. It's not gone." Tessa nodded, her expression soft and kind. "It never truly left you, my lord. You just needed to find the right way to bring it back." Azaleth felt a weight lift off his shoulders. For so long he had thought that the only way to reclaim his fire was by force, by overwhelming power. But now he understood. It wasn't about power, it was about harmony. It was about listening to the rhythm inside himself and letting it grow, slowly and steadily. He stood up, feeling the warmth of his flame growing brighter, stronger. "Thank you," he said, his voice full of gratitude. I think I understand now." Tessa smiled, her eyes gentle. "You don't need to thank me, my lord. You did the hard work. You just needed a little guidance." Azaleth nodded, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. For the first time, he didn't feel like a failure. He didn't feel like a dragon who had lost everything. He felt like a dragon who was beginning to find himself again. But as he turned to leave, Tessa called out to him, her voice full of concern. "My lord, be careful." Azaleth stopped and turned back to her. "Careful? Why?" "Not everyone in the palace will understand," she said, her gaze serious. "They may not see your flame the way you do. They might see it as weak or different. Be ready for that." Azaleth thought about her words. He knew she was right. The court, his family, they all expected him to be the perfect prince, the powerful dragon who could command the skies with his fire. But now he was something else, a dragon who was learning to listen, just to find balance, and to let his flame grow in its own way. "I'll be ready," he said, his voice firm. "Thank you, Tessa." With that, Azaleth spread his wings and took flight, the flame inside him growing stronger with every beat of his wings. He wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time, he felt like he was headed in the right direction. Hook, as Azaleth soared into the sky, he couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was yet to come. His flame was growing, but there were those in the palace who would never accept it, and soon he would have to face them.